Adam, how's it going?
Pretty good. Pretty good. It's a little early, but um, this seems to be pretty normal for me now in my old age, getting up at
Yeah,
the crack of dawn.
yeah. I was gonna say you're looking kind of old. Um,
Oh, thank you. That's great. It's been a
yep.
nice podcast. Nice speaking with you.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Well, let me add some context to that. I think we all remember the show Breaking Bad and our hero Walter White. And I just want to say that this is a very Walter White-esque backdrop that you have going. The whole motif, really. I know that he maybe wasn't a buck plaid or whatever that's called bathrobe guy. He was more of a button-down man, but nonetheless, this is sort of Walter White Breaking Bad-ish.
You know what? I'll accept that as a compliment.
Mm-hmm.
I'll accept that as a compliment. Even
Yeah,
though he was a villain, you kind of were rooting for him the whole time.
yeah. Well, yeah, and I was gonna say, like, given my comment about looking a little older, look, Walter White was an established man in his community. He was he was making an impact. He was leading people's lives. So anyway, we digress. So thanks for joining in here on Pod 2. It's been 2 full years since we've done Pod 1.
I can't believe that. Yeah. Yeah. Those were 2 full years. Very
Yeah,
full years. Yeah.
yeah. So we connected, I think, like something like March, April-ish of 2020.
hmm
Pandemic had yet to fully, I think, hit its full stride. And I was a few months out from heading to Boston, which you're getting a live feed report from Boston right now. Obviously, you're still in San Diego. Our both of our I guess hometowns, if you want to call it that, still.
Yeah. How's Boston been?
You know what? It's really grown on me. I have a lot of family out here, my Irish side. Though I'm half Italian and there's a lot of Italian people here as well. So it's a cool place. I mean, as you probably know, you probably spent a lot of time here.
Yeah, I've been there. Not too much time, but definitely been there. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
when we would come out this way during the summer times on occasion to see people of my dad's side of the family, that was that, not to date myself, but um, it was back in the era where I always joked that the big dig had yet to happen, or it was underway at least. It wasn't completed. Everybody, like a red badge of courage, had their arm out the window holding a cigarette, and they were inevitably laying on their horn
Yeah.
with a pretty authentic accent. You fast forward to 2022, and almost no one smokes that I can tell. Use of the horn has sort of been subdued, and even further subdued are the accents. I mean, they're out there, but they're a little bit harder to find. They're like needles in a haystack. So you really got to celebrate the OG Boston accent when you come across them these days. Yeah.
It's great. What are you wearing here? It looks like a priesthood kind of thing, missing the collar.
Oh man, that's I think that's a good or a bad thing. Um, Speaking of Boston, no, this is a shout out to Rag and Bone. This is a nice structured wool shirt. It's good for the mornings. When it's we're in New England here, Adam. So you post Labor Day, you take a little bit of turn for the chillier side of things, which we've certainly done. It's been a really mild year. Summertime of 2021 was not really a summer at all. It kind of rained the entire time, and this entire year has been a nice mild one. So maybe the winter will be a mild one, and it'll be less shoveling. There's a lot of shoveling to do in Boston.
Yeah, I don't miss that. I just love that about San Diego. Is there's no snow shoveling.
So
Really, no shoveling of any kind. So
no. I mean, so I was just gonna add in there. I went 2+ years or so before heading back to San Diego. I checked out law school since you and I have chatted. Did a year of that at Boston College,
Yeah.
which was an amazing sort of invigorating challenge. Being surrounded by, I gotta say, some extremely bright kids. Most of them were kids. There was like literally, I think, 3 people in my section at least that were older than me. One of them, let me just like highlight this gal. She was a fully functioning heart surgeon in her 1L of law school with a family. I just
Wow.
had no idea how she pulled it off, but she was obviously a very bright person. But nonetheless, you know, you'd be surrounded by these people that would be, you know, doing the readings every night 2 times and doing the supplemental readings and really just kind of having a very scholarly approach, which I respect. So
I just don't think I could go back to school. We were talking yesterday about kind of that reoccurring school nightmare that you have like post college of I forgot to drop the class and now finals are coming, or you know they're about to tell me that I can't graduate because I never took a class or something like that, and how that, of all the things in our lives that cause stress, the memories of college linger on forever. I used to get sick going back to like the georgetown.edu homepage, because that's where you would log into the student portal. And when I was working in New York, they like finally cornered me to get me to go back to Georgetown to recruit. And I just started sweating and like turned beet red. And I was like, I don't think I can go back there. It's this like experience that I don't know why it becomes so traumatizing. I didn't have any real bad experiences there. So yeah, I don't think I could subject myself to going back to school at this point.
yeah, no, I started mentally, I think, drawing a line at the end of first semester. Well, again, it was actually more of a pleasurable experience in hindsight, but my property law exam, start to finish, from when you hit the button and you see the clock start ticking, it was a 7-hour sit down exam.
Yeah,
And,
there's
and
not
I was
many
like,
things I would ever want to do for that long.
yeah, I'm like, wow, okay. So like that's like, you know, third of the day, just sort of sitting down in a chair. Okay. You know, and you start like kind of like doing that just sort of thought process. And you know, lawyers love it. I mean, the real McCoy practitioners, which, you know, I was raised by one, they love it. They're like Kobe Bryant in the gym. They can't get enough of it. And hats off to them, because many of those folks obviously become people that solve a lot of very important problems. And that's kind of what you learn about the law, which is, you know, like the Marines are the first in, the last out. Everybody knows that a good lawyer is there for you. A bad one just is sort of trying to hand out business cards. But you know, it's a profession that the world needs, and I think that's always kind of something to acknowledge. You know.
That's an interesting perspective on lawyers. So
Yeah, well, you know, I think not to spend too much time on this subject, because we want to turn the attention here to you and what you're doing. But yeah, just you read some of these cases and realize that in the very imperfect system that we have, there are always going to be situations where one side of that adversarial process is going to just need somebody to advocate pretty hard, you know. And you know, not to get up on the soapbox a little bit, but I know that you're from Jersey, and there was one particular case involving just the Puerto Rican Department of Labor and people finding their way up to Jersey to do work. And man, when it does not work out for somebody coming from Puerto Rico to Jersey to do work, it's a situation you need a lawyer for real fast. So that was one of the things that I think, you know, was just that kind of bracing awakening, I think, for everybody in the room. You know, when you read that kind of case law And it's impossible not to just be like, wow, like, given the circumstance, I think anybody that like moves forward with that profession as a life pursuit, it can be a very noble one, at any moment's notice, despite all the bad stereotypes out there about some lawyers, which are
Yeah.
oftentimes well deserved.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. It's a complicated system that we've created. So
Yep.
it's good that there's people there who can help guide and help get justice for people. But sometimes, you hear about stuff or you have interactions and you're just like, this is so unnecessary. If everyone was just truthful and honest, then we could probably wipe out half of that stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
So look, let's walk it all the way back to the very beginning of this pod.
Sorry.
You are about as established of a young guy as I think I've met in a long time. So we started out saying that you were looking old, and what I really should have said is, Adam, you're looking like an OG, right? And I think that that's the context that I met you in when you and I first encountered one another vis-a-vis breakaway training. Shout out Felipe Lorero and that whole crew of people. It being a kind of lifelong follower, former competitor, whatever, of the world of track and field, it's one of those environments like triathlon or crew, any of these kinds of things where you can't fake the funk on a nasty dunk, like Shaq says. You go onto the track, you go into the boat, you bang out your seat race, you run your race, and that's what you did that day. It's a very, very honest pursuit, and that's one of the things I've always really admired about you and your story.
Yeah, I guess like racing in general, there's not too many places to hide, and I think that's what's scary for a lot of people.
Yeah.
To actually be like, okay, well, I did all this training and I think I'm fast, and the next step is to actually, pin on a number, toe the line, and then find out what's actually going to happen. So, it's, playing a more traditional team sport. And I guess cycling is a little bit different because it is a team sport, but like soccer or football, there's a lot more that kind of goes into it rather than just like a sole focus on you, how you perform and show up on the day doesn't necessarily dictate the outcome. So yeah, I guess racing and kind of endurance sports like that's a little bit of a different animal that's a little more exposed. And I think that scares a lot of people. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, I want to talk about the differences, I guess, just being on a bike versus, like with track and field, right? You're in cross country, I guess there's a little bit more jostling. In track, you get that really that physicality in some of the lengthier distant events, or maybe in the 4x4. But in cycling in particular, and just being on two wheels, I mean, there are those moments where it immediately reminds me of the Serenity Prayer, where it's like, give me the wisdom to know the difference between what I can and cannot control, right?
Yeah. I think
just talk about that. Yeah.
I feel like more recently in at least the kind of racing that I was doing, the kind of criterium racing, it felt more and more like Jesus, take the wheel here, because it just felt like it was getting more and more dangerous. I don't really know where that came from. That could have come from me just getting older and not being willing to like subject myself to the same kind of risks and stuff like that. But I felt like I was more fit than ever. I had a stronger team than ever. And, each race you'd finish alive being like, holy shit, I don't know how many bullets I just dodged in there. Just all sorts of shit happening all the time in some of these events. So yeah, towards the end there, it was getting really dicey, and other people I think had the same opinion. So yeah, definitely a little bit of a serenity prayer going on.
Yeah, and I mean, like, let's like really put it into context. You've been doing Butcher Box's, like, I guess, tier 1 racing team for a while.
Yeah, I originally guest rode for them in towards the end of 2018. And then we assembled like this awesome squad in 2019, had a great time. Everyone came back to do it again in 2020, which I think was when we last talked. The season was supposed to be just kicking off, but COVID hit and kind of put everything on hold. Because all the guys had such a great time and so much success in 2019, we didn't get to do it in 2020. We all kind of looked at each other and was like, okay, I think we got to come back in 2021 and give this thing another shot together. So yeah, it was, I guess, the end of 18, 19, 20, and then eventually 2021. So 3 years and change with the program.
And so just describe the differences because, you know, I do want to recount this, like, sort of a few funny moments I've had on bicycles, but none of them have involved that kind of competition, like literally zero, right?
Yeah.
So just like in comparison to a normal cycling race versus something that's more multi-sport triathlon focused versus like when you're talking about doing these crits and things like this with the Butcher Box guys, just describe like the difference we're talking about here in terms of being on a bicycle.
Yeah, criterium racing is like the close combat of bike racing. It's you know, generally 120 guys going 30 miles an hour around a, you know, less than a mile circuit 80 times, all out and shoulder to shoulder, because we're, you know, in, you know, downtown. Generally it's like in a downtown area, downtown streets that they kind of close off. Pros race under the lights. High energy because it's, you know, the bigger races have fans kind of lining the whole course and beer gardens. They kind of create this big festival party like atmosphere around it. And it's pretty intense, and there's really nothing quite like it in terms of energy and focus. And then when you kind of step back and watch it from the outside, you're like, what the fuck are those guys thinking? Just because it's so fast and kind of seemingly so intense, and it can be super dangerous just because of the speeds. And, you know, these aren't you know, the most smooth of surfaces also, because it's normal city streets that they kind of rope off and barricade off and turn into a race course.
So how often is there just an outright pothole?
Well, that's funny, because that's eventually what ended my career, was an outright pothole. You'd think that a lot of times they know that they're having this huge race, right? It's like on the national calendar, big spotlight on it. So you'd think that a couple weeks in advance they'd go out and they'd say, okay, at least we could like fill some of these potholes, or, you know, maybe we shouldn't put the course this year on this section of road because it's absolute shit, or there's no real way to get good lighting here. But I think some of these things are so rooted in tradition. They're like, oh, we couldn't possibly move this course. I don't know, we'll just kind of mark it with some spray paint, or hopefully in the pre-ride everyone kind of notices this dangerous corner or this huge lateral crack. Or some of the courses are better than others, and the ones that are not good are notoriously not good. And so I feel like that's part of the reason that they don't want to change it. It's like, oh, everyone knows that this is a dicey spot, so we're going to pass the same pothole 80 times. You'd think that at some point people would remember, like, there's a pothole here, but again, people are idiots. So
I mean, okay, so like you just touched on it. You had a crash in
Yeah.
one of these last races that you did. Talk about that. I'm sure it's a tough thing to kind of just describe, but walk us through the moment if you can.
Yeah, so it was towards the end of 2021. Wasn't the best season for me for a variety of reasons, some different crashes here and there, some bad results. But it was towards Somerville back in New Jersey. It was kind of towards the end of the season. And yeah, through the front straight on this course was a massive pothole that everyone got to see during, the warm-up lap. Everyone got to see it, every single lap that we passed. But there's so many people jammed onto such a tight stretch that everyone kind of is fanned out across the road. And if you forget that there's a pothole there, or you have nowhere to go because you're shoulder to shoulder, you're going to go right into it. So that's what happened, not to me, to a guy a couple wheels ahead. He hit the pothole, basically double flatted immediately. Everyone's kind of fanning out around him to avoid, his rapid slowdown. And the guy in front of me kind of like veered to the side. He had disc brakes. I was still on rim brakes at the time. So he was able to slow down a lot quicker than I was. I slammed into the back of him. Our bikes kind of got tangled up into each other, and we managed to keep it upright. But at the same time, now you have two bodies going at, 30 plus miles an hour trying to decelerate. And we just kind of took each other into these metal barriers that they have set up on race courses, which is also idiotic. I don't know why there's just not a better solution. Because the barriers, when they're metal like that, they don't protect the riders. And I don't think they even necessarily protect I guess they protect the spectators, but they certainly don't protect the riders. Anyway, we hit these things. I got tangled up in the barriers, ended up going over the barrier, and kind of came to leaning against the telephone pole. With a whole bunch of thoughts, and ended up breaking my left hand in 2 spots. And that I kind of, when I kind of came to wrapped up, my very first thought was, yes, I don't have to race next week. It wasn't, where's my bike? How soon can I get back in the race? Wasn't like, doing a wellness check on myself. It was like, okay, I think this whole thing is over for me. And I thought that was really telling. And then on top of that, the person that brought me to the emergency room actually drove into the parking garage with my bike on the roof, and whatever damage hadn't been done to my bike, that just kind of totaled my race bike. And I think that was, a sign from above that if you didn't think it was done, it's done now. So yeah, that's kind of how it ended for me. Obviously the season was over at that point, because recovering from a broken hand takes way longer than I ever anticipated. So I had a lot of time to kind of think and reflect and be with the consequences of this activity that I loved, and contributed such a huge part to who I am, and give me so many opportunities to see all these cool places and meet all these amazing people and make some like real lifelong lasting friendships. So saying goodbye was very difficult. But I kind of knew that I had to. I felt like either my attitude towards the racing that I was doing was changing, or the racing was changing, and I just kind of didn't really want to be in it like that anymore. I wasn't willing to take the risk. The risk reward kind of fell offline for me a little bit.
Yeah, no, I hate saying this, but my second year of playing college football, there was a moment where we were doing some film review of the game, whatever it was, and we had this guy on our team, Kyle, see if I can pull his name out thin air. Kyle Swafford, I think it was his name, straight out of Kansas City. I am almost positive. And this is back in the day where they still had a wedge on kickoffs. You know, so like back in the day, kick returner gets the ball and the wedge forms usually with like a fullback or like some big sort of chunky lineman dudes in front of the kick returner. And that's on the return side. But the kickoff team typically has a wedge buster. And this is, you know, Dartmouth College. It's a top 5 or 10 sort of ranked school. So we're talking about some smart kids. But Kyle Swafford was a very dedicated wedge buster. Okay. And like I played kick returner. And like this is my second year, and I'm like watching this film review of this guy, Kyle. He had like this amazing game blowing up the wedge. And I'm just watching him just fly through these dudes on a couple different kickoffs, just absolutely just dummying people, crushing himself in the process as well. And I was just like, God, like this is insane. Like, what is that guy doing? Right. And like, look, like, you know, it's not to say that, you know, you're willing to lay down that competitive edge because it's there inside of you. Like it is with you. It's like, it's going to be there with you forever and ever.
I can't turn that off.
You can't turn that off. So. That's never going away. But the realization, like you said, when you came to and you're just like, man, like, you know, you broke your hand, but like, thank goodness you didn't break your neck, your collarbone.
Yeah. It can always be worse. It can always be worse. A couple months after, so it took a little time to recover until I could start riding again.
Yeah.
You know, I was riding my girlfriend's gravel bike, you know, just because I sent all, you know, my team, you send the team bike back. I didn't really have any equipment. I hadn't had to like buy a bike on my own for years because, you know, whether it was, you know, triathlon or bike racing, kind of always was supplied equipment, and I was super grateful for that. So I was like, okay, well now I'm gonna have to like, you know, now I'm just a civilian. So let me figure this out. But once I started riding again, you know, I got a bike, and I thought, okay, you know, I'll still get all that kind of competitive spirit out on some of these like real massive, super hard group rides, like the Wednesday morning World Championships that, you know, rolls through Camp Pendleton at Mach 5, and it really gets to feel like a race. There's really no consequences. You know, if I want to go out and, you know, rip my own legs off, I can. If I want to go and sit in, I can. And I just know that every time I go to that, I want to be, you know, at the front, making it hard, you know, kind of duking it out. And then if I feel like I really don't want to sprint today, I don't have to. If I want to contest a sprint, I can. And it's just fun. And you can kind of get all those competitive juices flowing again. So I thought, okay, you know what? I don't need a race. I can kind of go and have fun at these group rides. So it had been a couple of weeks that I was doing it, and this was maybe, I don't know, I want to say March. We were on our way back, and it's a very fast section of Camp Pendleton where I think it used to be an airfield. It's like a slight downhill. I think the group was going about, I don't know, 35 or something like that. So we were hauling. I was behind a gentleman who is, I would say, you know, one of the steadiest, safest wheels to be on. Whenever I've like overexerted myself, I'm like, where's Tom? Where's Tom? Okay, here's Tom. All right, as long as I stay with Tom, I'm going to survive. You know, he's just so experienced, and he's been in the sport forever. But coming up along the left side of the peloton was someone who was riding maybe a little bit outside of their not outside of their ability, but, you know, was definitely in the red zone, head down, pedaling hard, and the peloton kind of shifted to the left. Tom and this guy collided. Now they're leaning on each other. I'm right behind them. You know, they kind of play this game where, you know, you lean against the person that's kind of made contact with you so that you can both kind of steady. But so Tom was leaning in, the other guy kind of course corrected, went left. Tom goes straight down. Somehow I thread the needle between the two of them, slam on my brakes with everyone else. You know, I sprint back, and the guy that crashed is laying there making like the most horrible noise I've ever heard. come out of someone. I think he was unconscious. It was like this horrible, like gurgling, growling noise. Blood all over the road. And eventually he had to get airlifted out. He like punctured lungs, broken ribs, broken scapula, broken collarbone, like a really bad brain bleed. If there weren't medical professionals on that ride, he probably would have died right there. I knew his daughter, and I grabbed his phone and said, Siri, call Jen. So now I'm like communicating with his daughter to say, we need to get in touch with Tom's wife. Something happened to your dad. It's a really bad crash. She's freaking out. And that, I just remember later that day, I kind of had like this like mini panic attack laying there in yoga, because I was thinking about like, shit, what if that was my dad? What if that was, Laurel's dad, my girlfriend? Then it was like, shit, what if that was me? I was basically next in line. Is it really worth kind of this like potential life-changing injury, because I want to go out and I want to, just kind of smash on a Wednesday? I can do that. It doesn't have to be with this big group. I don't, what do I really have to prove? Yeah, it's fun, like the big kind of social aspect, but some of these big group rides, in my opinion, there's people who are there riding outside of on the edge of their own fitness, right? So they're head down, gritting their teeth, chewing on their stem, trying to just hold on. And I think that causes people to make bad and risky decisions when they're just doing anything to kind of stay attached to this group. Right. Or they kind of lose perspective that like, hey, this is just a Wednesday morning, and it's okay if you're not the first person through the gate or the third person through the gate. We're all trying to get to our jobs later today in one piece, and we're all lucky that we can even come out and do this. And I think a lot of people just kind of lose that perspective. And yeah, when that happened, I was like, man, I don't even think I want to do these rides anymore, just because I had dodged enough bullets and managed to make it out of, professional, semi-professional bike racing with only 3 broken collarbones and a broken hand. So yeah, even kind of like the big fast group rides around here, which there are plenty of them, I haven't really been doing. There's a ride I'll do Saturday mornings that has, maybe 10, 12, 15 people on it. It's pretty fast, but it's orderly, it's single file. And then I'll go meet up with my buddies and we'll ride, and it's steady, and, we'll whack it in a couple sections, but it's been a big change, and I don't really miss any of it. So.
Well, I think that's kind of a great thing for you to be able to sort of say to yourself, that you just don't miss it. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I know that like there's a romantic element to all of this, but any time that you can kind of step away from anything and I think view it with clear eyes, in the rearview mirror, so to speak, it's assuring that you made the right choice. You're not clamoring to do it tomorrow, like you're saying.
Yeah, I found myself watching some of the races this year that were live streamed, some of the like the national races that I would have been in had I kept racing, watching, and there's, the inevitable crash with 2 laps to go in the corner, that there's always a crash. And I kind of had a little bit of feeling like, yeah, told you so. Like, what did you guys think was going to happen there? Yeah, it wasn't so much about, watching the action and the drama unfold in the racing. It was more of watching to make sure that, my friends and old teammates, got through these things in one piece, and some did and some didn't. And is almost like a nervous mother watching, her kids race, is kind of how it felt. It's like, so I don't know what that says about the sport or my view of the sport, but I wasn't tuning in, for the the racing of the race. I felt it was more of like trying to be a guardian of some of, you know, the good people in the sport, trying to watch it and just, yeah, give them a little prayer, even though I'm really not a religious person. But
Yeah, I mean, I was going to add, you know, given our comments here about you being a very much kind of an OG in this world of competition that you're in, I mean, you must be kind of basically like someone capable of being like a player coach these days, given your amount of experience.
yeah, well, I got into the sport really late, so from like in a, you know, a race experience standpoint, or, you know, a tactical experience, um I I was definitely kind of like the young one that I looked to some of the younger rider, like, you know, age wise younger riders on the team, but some of these guys have been racing since they were, you know, 10, 15 years old. um but on the other side of it, you know, from a life perspective, and, you know, I definitely felt like I was, you know, hopefully more of like a mentor. I don't know if like father figure is the right word, but um you know, I felt like part of my role on team was kind of to help keep everyone together and kind of manage the personalities and manage the morale a little bit. um but yeah, when it came to the actual racing part, I was definitely looking to some of the younger guys who had way more experience than I did. They were kind of the leaders on the road. And, you know, I couldn't have been more thankful for the people that I was able to have around me as I kind of made my way through the sport like I want to say later stage in life. I was definitely, you know, an old guy. So
I mean, look, it's yeah, it's so many thoughts kind of go through my head when I think about that as it relates to competition, because, you know, there's that kind of ratio between experience and, you know, the songs of innocence versus experience, I guess you could say, right? You know, when you don't know any better, you know, versus when you sort of have been there and done that, and there's an advantage to the two of them.
yeah, yeah. And because I had, you know, I was super lucky between my brother-in-law, who's, you know, one of the winningest bike racers, criterium racers in American history.
What is his
He,
name?
as I Daniel Holloway.
Shout out.
Yeah, so as I was kind of, you know, making a rapid push kind of through the sport, you know, that guy had been racing since, again, you know, decades of racing. I don't, you know, hundreds, if not, you know, thousands of race experiences that he can draw on instantly. You know, I think really made him a really good racer. You know, tactically, basically every race scenario, every corner, he's seen before many times over, and kind of can have that instant recall of how this thing's probably going to play out. So having him as a resource as I was kind of moving through the early ranks of racing, you know, I could always call on him to kind of debrief or get his thoughts, and, you know, kind of watch him race at a much higher level than I was racing at the time, was so valuable and so thankful. And so, you know, anytime I got the opportunity, or now, if, you know, a junior kind of reaches out, or someone who's kind of entering the sport, you know, wants to talk, I've always been someone who's willing to share everything that I learned and kind of give my thoughts and feedback, even though it's not decades of experience. I got to see it at a fairly high level, at least domestically here in the US. And so that's something that I will always make a conscious effort to kind of help, and maybe help someone avoid some of the mistakes and harder learning experiences that I had to learn the hard way. If I can help them avoid some of that, or see the sport or see a race from a different perspective that maybe they wouldn't necessarily have seen, you know.
Having said
That's
that,
a big part of it.
having said that, and I don't mean to try and shine a light here on anything that's perceived as in any way, shape, or form a negative. If you were talking to either your younger self or just like that up and comer, like what's a mistake that you would call out and be like, hey, I did this and this was just like flat out wrong and don't do that. What's
Oh yeah, well, from like, well, yeah, the one piece of advice that I always give people, especially if they're making a fairly kind of rapid push through the earlier categories of bike racing, because a lot of that you can just do with brute force. I entered the sport with a fairly big engine from just triathlon. So you have a lot of fitness, and with a lot of fitness, you can get away with a lot of things that once you're racing against everyone who has the same level of fitness, because in cycling, you move from category 5 up through like category 1/pro. And you move through the categories by accumulating points based on how you finish in races. And so everyone, no matter how strong you are, everyone starts out of 5. And so people that move through like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 fairly quickly, a lot of times they can do it just by overpowering the field and riding away from everyone just because they have that fitness. But once you get to the higher categories where everyone has that fitness, okay, now it becomes a little bit of tactics and, a little bit of gamesmanship. And that's where the real kind of art and science of how to race bikes falls in. So the piece of advice that I always give people who are moving through the sport pretty quickly is try to win every way possible before you're kind of forced into a different category where everyone's going to be stronger. So if you're someone if you're a breakaway specialist, like if you're someone that has a massive FTP and you can just ride away from the field, okay, know that you can ride away from these people. Why don't you try to win via a bunch sprint? Why don't you try to, force a small group selection? Use these opportunities to experience different ways of racing and different ways of finishing before you're kind of forced into that next level. And then, figure out how to win a whole bunch of different ways there. It just will make you a more well-rounded cyclist, a better racer, more savvy tactically by building on these different skill sets while you still can, before you're kind of, forced into those higher categories.
And you mentioned FTP. What is that an acronym for?
Oh, that's your functional threshold power. That's basically how
power output
you can. Yeah. It's kind of a baseline measure of your power output before your energy systems start to switch over from like aerobic to anaerobic, and it's it's basically like raw, extended kind of raw power, I guess. So,
and then again, coming from a more of a, I guess, a track guy, I had a roommate that made the Olympic team invite for crew for the heavyweight 8, and he was obsessed with his VO2 max. So explain, if you can, how you view someone's VO2 max, which is a little bit more genetic, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I think a big portion of it is dictated by like your grandma's mitochondria or something like that.
Right. Versus, like you said, sort of this earned, built up sort of sense of equity as it relates to your cardio base. Just sort of like describe these two, because you can develop one of them.
So, well, I mean, and I think that's where bike racing gets really interesting. So VO2 max is basically, at what point can your body no longer take oxygen and process it into energy? Or I guess that's like a really simplified way to explain it. At what point does your body kind of flip over into, kind of producing lactic acid? I might be oversimplifying this. So it's basically it's a measure of how hard can you push yourself before your body's like, oh shit, we gotta figure out a different way to kind of grab at energy here. And so people that have really high VO2 maxes can, I guess as it relates to bike, have a really high power output, real high kind of energy expenditure at a baseline before their body kind of switches over to, an anaerobic state. And so as that relates to FTP, or your like functional threshold power, it's kind of that line where your body switches over. The idea of your FTP is, what's the max power that you can put out for an hour, is essentially that. So that's a really useful number for someone who, does like to ride in a breakaway, or is going for, kind of a long solo effort. It's important in triathlon, obviously, because you're alone out there. And so the more power you can push for a longer period of time, the faster you're going to go. But in bike racing, you have people who maybe don't have a massive, FTP, but they kind of, like a sprinter is not going to have a super high FTP, but they're going to have a really high, shorter peak power. And so like a well-developed team is going to have a good mixture of these kind of different body types and different kind of genetic types, where you have a couple guys that can go from far out. You have, guys that are going to be part of like the lead out train for your sprinter, who can just, really crank away for a long period of time to keep them at the front of the race and safe. Whereas the sprinters, they're trying to, hide from the wind because they want to save their legs for kind of that big kind of peak power output at the end. So, just like FTP is a good measure of your kind of fitness, I guess, your kind of aerobic fitness, but it doesn't necessarily dictate how you're going to be as a bike racer, because there's, like I was saying before, there's many ways to win a bike race. And knowing your skills and your abilities, and having some racecraft, and a little bit of game theory, and being aware of how the race is unfolding and how you think it's going to unfold, and positioning and energy conservation, almost makes it anyone's game if you're playing it right. And I think that's one of the really beautiful parts about the sport, is it's not just a fitness competition. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, it's almost like the person who spent the least amount of energy early on is kind of the person that's going to be most successful at the end. It doesn't matter how hard you rode during the race if you finish last. So
it's amazing.
And that's definitely, that's definitely a lot of like a big stat that people will put out there, like, oh my gosh, that race was so hard. I averaged, 350 watts for 90 minutes, or, 380 for an hour. It's like, okay, well, did you win? No. It's like, well, then, who fucking cares? What does it matter? So, yeah. I
was going to say, it's amazing the parallels that analogy sort of invites, as, because, it's a brutal way to look at it, because you're like, yeah, you did great, but ...
Yeah. It's not, it's not a competition on who can suffer the most, right? It's who's kind of really refined the craft and the skill. And, there is still in bike racing, there is still kind of that team aspect. And so, sometimes it's not your success, but it's the team success. Like my job on ButcherBox wasn't to necessarily win races. It was to help my team win. So there was a lot of, self-sacrificing that had to go on, knowing that, yeah, I might not finish the race, but if I did my job and, set up the teammates kind of at the end to be in a good spot, then for me, that was a win, and that was really rewarding. And I kind of loved my role in that way, just kind of helping other people succeed. And hopefully I did a good job at it. So
would you say that you were like the point guard distributor of the ButcherBox team?
I wasn't the only one. I mean, we had a lot of them, but I definitely was by no means, the guy that people were looking at as the finisher. So,
Right.
and yeah, for someone kind of, newer in the sport, that took a lot of pressure off. And if I could just go out and do exactly what I was told, um, to me that was a win, and that was really rewarding for me. So,
Yep. No, you mentioned something earlier about just the art versus the science. And, at the upper ranks of anything, whether it's sports or business or anything else, and the talent level starts to, kind of rise to the top, I guess, or you sort of find that everybody in the room has a similar sort of overlap in the way of skill sets, accomplishments, whatever. I think that that's where you start seeing this kind of additional psychology, this additional gamesmanship, this I don't want to say it's the Mario Cipollini smoking a cigarette, on the bike kind of vibes, but talk about what you see there in that world when people are trying to kind of signal in a way to let you know like where they're at with their FTP and their power output.
yeah. Well, now, especially with like social media, there's a lot of people sharing, big training rides that they did, or, big numbers that they're putting out. And, um, I'm not the kind of guy to post a picture of my Garmin at the end of a hard workout. It's, I finish those types of things, and I like, okay, let me just put that one into the war chest. Let me put that one into the war chest. I don't feel like I need to share, the feats that I accomplished, with the world. So, but I definitely would find myself like seeing other people's workouts or numbers or rides, being like, oh shit, no, okay, that's pretty impressive. But can they deliver on race days? That's something you know I never thought about that stuff, come race day necessarily. And then also, you know, with the rise of social media, everyone's now racing with a GoPro helmet on, or a GoPro on their helmet, mounted on their bike. And there's been this recent like glorification of aggressive riding, and people bumping and pushing, and um, kind of the more like aggressive side of bike racing, which inevitably leads to crashing. And people always want to see the big crashes at races and stuff like that. And then people take all these kind of like aggressive moves that they've made or they've captured on video. You put like some dubstep to it, and now you have this super aggressive video that kind of gets circulated. And I think a lot of people, especially a lot of younger people that are moving through the sport, see these people that are supposed to be kind of role models in the sport putting out these videos, thinking like, oh, okay, I guess, well, if so and so is doing it and they're really successful, I guess I should be leaning into people and kind of making my own space where there's no space, or taking chances and riding up the gutter, and doing all these really sketchy things when they don't have the skills, it's not necessary, or they're riding around people who aren't expecting that kind of movement. And it just creates a very dangerous race environment that's just so unnecessary. But people want to continue to produce content, and so I don't know if people are doing stuff like, oh, this is going to look great for Instagram, or I'll take all this stuff and, oh, this is going to be awesome. But it's that to me really needs to stop. That kind of like aggressive posturing and aggressive riding is just totally uncalled for.
Yeah,
And and there's definitely in riders where it's like, oh man, I know that this guy will put me into a curb. Yeah, okay, I'll give him a little bit of space. And I don't know if that's right. I don't know if that's fair, the way to do it, but for me, it just I think all that shit needs to stop. So
Yeah, I was going to say aggressive posturing for the gram is definitely something that is not unique to just the world of bike racing.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And shout out to everybody who knows a thing or two about not doing that. And then with Strava, I mean, I know Strava's been around forever at this point, but is that also something that you think is just influencing people in a weird direction, you know, needing to kind of flex?
You know, when Strava first came out, I think there was a big push that people were saying, oh, it's, you know, it's going to cause so much danger. People are going to be taking these risks to get, like, you know, their KOMs, like the king of the mountain, or to have the fastest recorded time on a specific segment. And I think there was a brief period of time where I think it did create a little bit of danger. But people have really kind of, in my opinion, or at least, you know, people that I know have kind of moved on from really taking risks to have the fastest time on a segment. But now it's kind of these more like, you know, calculated like segment hunting rides where people will go out, you know, let me check the weather, let me check the wind, you know, let me get like 6 people to kind of lead me into a segment so that I can, you know, record the fastest time. And, you know, it's, if that gets people working hard and pushing themselves and, you know, out riding and out, you know, training and wanting to kind of achieve something, I don't really have a problem with it. In the beginning I did. And I also think it's kind of tacky when like former pros go out and they're like, oh, I'm going to go and, you know, try to have the fastest time up these climbs. It's like, you know, leave that to the amateurs. Leave that to the amateurs. You know, you had your run in the Tour de France. I don't think there's any question as to whether or not you're a strong rider. So, you know, why don't you just leave that to the people that have other things to kind of prove and achieve. So,
No, that makes
and
sense.
I think there's less and less of that from the retired pro standpoint, which I think is good. I think people are it's slowly kind of evolving as to, you know, I guess I guess like what's cool or what's not cool, or what people actually are kind of caring about. It is cool to see numbers that pros can kind of put out. So there's a lot of data sharing now, especially, you know, post racing. Some of the cycling publications will do analysis of, you know, a winner's ride. So you'll be able to kind of see their power data and kind of, you know, now that pros are kind of posting rides to Strava, you know, in the middle of the Tour de France, obviously these guys are blowing any times up any climbs that an amateur had just totally out of the water, especially in this last year's Tour de France. Seeing some of the records that got set were just mind boggling. So that's really cool. But yeah, it's definitely fun kind of watching these things evolve and watching people's take on how these things kind of play out.
No, without a doubt. I think that it's cool, especially I think if there's maybe I don't want to say a silver lining post pandemic here or whatever, but I think that all of our experience of the totality of the digital portal, however we're experiencing that digital portal, whether it's through an app, whether it's through our camera, whether, you know, whatever, you know, however that may be, I think that there's almost been a rejiggering of the code of ethics that applies to these things because we're all on them more. So I think that we have like more of a shared baseline now.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I guess I'm saying
but
that
the Strava athlete has kind of been replaced by, you know, just the TikTok athlete or the Instagram athlete, where it's like, what are you trying to prove here? What's the point of this all? But again, I go back and it's like, you know what? It's not hurting me. It's not hurting anyone else. If this makes this person feel good and they're getting out and they're working hard and, you know, they're trying to best a segment or best a personal time, all about it. So
Still can't fake the funk in a nasty dunk, just like Shaq said.
That's true.
Right?
That's true. But I do, I do wish that Strava could kind of flag, oh, this segment was performed solo in the middle of a 100-mile ride versus, oh, this KOM attempt was a targeted effort, with a lead out of, 20 guys with the tailwind. It's, it is, I will say I finished a ride and I'm like, wow, that was pretty hard through there. And I upload the data and I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, that was pretty hard. And I wish I could, there should be some sort of, distinction in there about what was earned and what was kind of, a group effort for someone. So
Yeah, there should be a real deal street cred score, like a
yes, yeah, there you go. Yeah, maybe it's just this person has the KOM, but their street cred on that KOM is a little different. Yeah, maybe there's some sort of web overlay that we can create for that.
Yeah, let's talk offline about this. So I guess like two more questions. One, just like not 100 names, but who are the folks that you want to specifically shout out in terms of just being really inspirational, like you said, people that ridden a bunch of races with you. Just who are some of the names that you just are like, hey, I have to say this guy, or this gal.
Yeah. Wow, because I've been so lucky from my intro to kind of endurance sports, right? That's Felipe, that's Chris, that's Luke, the three guys at Breakaway.
And name their last names: Felipe Lerrero, Luke Walton.
Yeah, Felipe Lerrero, Luke Walton, Chris Berg.
Shout out.
Those guys were, shout out to those three guys for really being like three of the best training partners that I could have ever had. Kicking my ass day in and day out when I first moved out to San Diego, and was like, oh yeah, wow, look at this kind of, interesting sporting, endurance sports. Really opened my eyes to endurance sports. Shout out to my sister, Becca Schepps, for convincing me that I would have a way better time racing bikes. She was like, you always say that you hate swimming and you hate running and you're posting the fastest bike splits. Why don't you just race bikes? Oh, wow. Yeah. So shout out to her for really getting me involved in all the pain and suffering that I've endured from bike racing. Shout out to her now husband, Daniel Holloway, for just being an awesome mentor with a little bit of tough love, but a lot of knowledge and experience that he was always willing to share. Maybe not in the race, but certainly after the race, he would debrief, and that was such a valuable resource. And then, kind of some of the local guys that I did a lot of riding and racing with, the first team that I was on in San Diego. Chris Basaw was an awesome training partner, awesome teammate. Kevin Festini, and all the guys kind of at SDBC. So shout out SDBC. And then the guys at ButcherBox, Steve Cullen, for giving me the opportunity to actually, try my hand at some of these bigger races. And then Steve Cullen was, one of the founders and like managers and inspirers and leaders and, visionary over at, ButcherBox Racing. And then it was the guys that I have unforgettable experiences with, Spencer Movenzada, Cesar Gallo, John Harris, Connor Saley, Matt Storty, Alex McLaughlin, Sam Rosenholtz, Danny Estevez for a short stint there, Matt Storty, and just everyone at ButcherBox it was really hard to say goodbye. And a story I'll share is after my last crash, went to the hospital, then got picked up by Sam, and we went to Olive Garden, which is where we spent a inordinate amount of time on the road.
The
At Olive Garden,
breadsticks, the breadsticks keep you coming back. I mean,
it was it was post. Well, it's tough because I'm gluten free and I don't eat meat, and so going to an Olive Garden, it was like, okay, I guess I'll get the gluten free pasta with shrimp, and I was just like, I fucking hate this place, but I love my teammates so much, and it was so at Olive Garden, I'm on painkillers, got a bottle of wine in me, and we're driving back to the hotel where now I have to pack my bike up, and or what was left of my bike, and I can only use one hand, and I'm in the car with Sam, and he's driving me back to the hotel, and yeah, I start to tear up now telling the story, and I just started to just kind of cry because I knew that this was the end, and I was basically packing up, saying goodbye. I wasn't going to be at any more races. I knew I just wasn't going to race next year, and I start to get sad now, but I just asked him if he could do a couple more laps of the parking lot, just because I was bawling my eyes out, and it was a really emotional goodbye because I had such an incredible experience that I'll never forget with those guys. And racing was one thing, but the kind of the friendship and the antics, and getting to travel to cities and just spend time, and I was so thankful for the opportunity to get to do it, that saying goodbye was pretty hard. And I'm sure the painkillers and wine kind of helped that, but I guess even as I say it now, a year removed, still kind of makes me tear up a little bit. So shout out to all those guys for everything.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, spoken. I don't use the phrase OG lightly, because I think that it's kind of one of those things that everybody knows you earned. And to hear you, bare your soul and be emotional like this about something that obviously was and still is such a huge part of your life. I think that people immediately get the sense of just equity that you have built up, in that world. And it's not to be taken lightly, because these kinds of things don't just happen overnight. You develop it little by little every day. So massive amounts of respect to you for taking a passion that you had to such a level. I mean, it's just something that not a lot of people, I think, can really wrap their heads around when you really break it down as to how much time it takes.
Yeah, it was a steep learning curve, but I think if you just put in the work, I was just willing to put in the work because I wasn't born with, not necessarily genetically gifted, at least in my opinion, in kind of endurance sports, but I just loved the challenge and willing to put in the time and the work to just kind of see how far I can push myself. So that's definitely something that won't ever go away, whether it's work, whether it's athletics in some form. I just kind of have a hard time turning that off, and yeah, I guess I'm it's a blessing and a curse, but I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, I mean, I was saving up the last question as to sort of some New Horizon stuff, which I know is going to have a deep well of new things for you in that lane. And at the same time, I think it's only natural to, whenever you've spent so much time in a certain kind of world, I think it's more healthy to sort of spend enough time kind of exiting from it, in a sense.
Yeah.
Just so that that transition doesn't feel in any way sort of forced. I think that we have this kind of inclination these days to sort of celebrate the on to the next one spirit. You know, turn the page, on to the next one, chuck it in the whatever bag, and this is what we got going on right now. And I'm a full-fledged believer in said philosophy, but not if it takes away from the proper sort of timing involved to sort of just process, you know, something really important that you did. I mean, that's vital. So.
Yeah, definitely trying my hands at some new things. I started playing squash. You know, I kind of like dabbled in the racket sports during COVID. I started playing tennis again. But after I broke my hand, I was like, okay, well, what's like a one-handed racket sport? And so I was playing pickleball maybe before I should have started playing pickleball, just because, you know, one hand was totally useless. But then for pickleball, I was like, oh, you know, I did play like a little bit of squash in college. I should see if I could find some squash courts. And so found some squash courts in San Diego. Acknowledged that I need to learn how to do this properly. So started taking some lessons, and the coach there was pretty funny. He found out that, you know, I had raced bikes, and he kind of watched one of the American Crit documentaries that ended up getting made about kind of the whole butcher box experience. He came back the next time that I showed up, and he was like, wow, you know, Adam, I gotta admit, when you first showed up, I thought like, oh man, this guy's gonna be a real clunker, but you're like actually an athlete, and you like are actually gonna put in the work and work really hard. And I'm like, yeah, Tyler, that's really kind of the only way I know how to achieve anything in sport, is just to put in the work. And he's like, oh, this is gonna be great. And it's been awesome kind of learning a new skill, finding something else to get my ass kicked in and day out. And everyone, shout out San Diego Squash, everyone there has been awesome in you know, helping me learn and grow. And it's just a new challenge that's been so much fun and so addictive. And I'm sure my girlfriend's like, what the fuck? Like, why can't you just do anything like medium? Why do you have to go all in and play squash now 7 days a week? But it's just kind of how I'm hardwired. I want to be good, and I want to work hard, and that's what it takes for me to be good at something, is a lot of hard work. So about the challenge.
Look, Adam, I couldn't have a more respect for sort of just how you approach all this kind of stuff. And it's yeah, you know, it's always a motivating thing to connect with you. And you know, I want to do this again and just kind of check in and cover down on the new horizons you're making in squash.
Hopefully there'll be some, but you know, right now I'm still getting my ass kicked, but it's looking better every day. It's looking better every day. And I have a hard time saying no to people that want to match. And so I feel like I'm the guy, they're like, oh, Adam will probably want to play today. And, you know, you'll get requests from people. I'm like, God, this guy just wants to beat up on me, but I'll show up, I'll play, I'll get a good sweat in. And yeah, so I bring a lot of fitness to the learning part of squash. And so while I might not have all of the refined skills yet, definitely fitness carries a long way. And the longer that I can keep a point alive, the more likely I am to win the point. Just again, it's just hustle and hard work, you know, is a great baseline foundation that I have to learning a new sport and learning a new skill and a new challenge. So it's been a lot of fun, and yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far.
And just out of curiosity, because I've watched some squash from an arm's distance. I know that it is described for people who don't maybe know the subtle differences between squash and racquetball, one, and then two, describe what makes a squash stroke unique from, say, tennis, racquetball, or pickleball.
Yeah, so squash is similar to racquetball in that it's played in an indoor court. The The difference is, one, a squash court is, I think, a little wider. I think a squash court is a little wider and a little shorter front to back and a little wider side to side. But there are also height restrictions on the side walls, on the back wall, and then also on the front wall, the ceiling's out of play. Racquetball, as long as everything but the ground is in, I mean, you can bounce off the ground. So there is a little bit of wall height restrictions in squash. And then the ball, a racquetball, everyone knows a racquetball, super bouncy. A squash ball is, a little smaller than a golf ball. And there's a little bit of fluid inside of it that expands when it warms up to give it a little bit of bounce. But if you drop a squash ball from waist high, it's probably not bouncing any higher than, just above, maybe halfway between your ankle and your knee when it's fully warm. I mean, there's just no bounce on the ball. Versus a racquetball, you bounce it from waist high, it's going to bounce up kind of above your knee. So those are the biggest things. Racket's a little longer, a little narrower, whereas a racquetball racket's kind of, short, more like paddle shaped. But both are a ton of fun, and you're going to get pretty sweaty doing both. So,
and a big lunge sport.
Yes, big lunge sport. Unlike cycling. So my first night at open squash, oh my gosh, the heart and lungs and strength can get you there, but if you don't have that conditioning of taking huge deep lunges, I basically couldn't walk for a week. I was like, oh my gosh, I am in a tremendous amount of pain, but that was so fun, and I will be back next week. So yeah, that's a good way to put it. Big lunge sport, big twisting sport, versus cycling, where it's forwards only, of one repetitive motion, and you're kind of locked in there. So the aches and pains have definitely come from trying new things, and that's also part of it, which I'm kind of drawn to. Is like, wow, I've been missing out on a lot of dynamic movement via just focusing on bikes. So
yeah, no, there's a recurring theme here. You like competition, you like pushing yourself, you love these kinds of events and sports where it's a battle of will, it's a battle of preparation, it's a battle of attrition against your opponent.
Yeah, and there's really nowhere to hide. Kind of like a one-on-one sport, just like combat sports was with boxing. It's like, it's up to you to make this thing work, right? There's not there's not really a place to hide. There's not other people to kind of fall back on when it's it's basically you versus the opponent, which there's a lot to that.
Yeah, without a doubt. So just as we kind of, I guess, kind of introduce the goodbye here, I mean, do you have you set a goal for squash at this time?
No, not at this time. Not at this time. It's to just slowly get better and better, and start to take a couple games off of the people that crush me, and then start to take a couple matches off of them, and slowly, pick off the players that are better than me, which there are plenty. So there will no shortage of challenges on the squash front, but I have not set any other kind of loftier goals other than try to be better today than I was yesterday, and try not to make the same mistakes, and try not to get any bad habits. I am starting from a fresh, clean slate, so developing good skill, developing good technique, which is it's not easy to teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah, well, look, I think what's amazing is that you are, because of your, I guess, fearlessness to sort of throw yourself into these new arenas, you have the unique, I think, sort of positioning here to not only have a few different master splinters in your background with respect to all these different sports that you've done, but that you've also ironically become the master splinter yourself, which I think is a really nice place to be.
Yeah, it's good, and there if you look for it, you'll always be able to find people in a sport or in a personal life or professional life that care deeply about you, and if you're willing to reach out for help and not settle and work to kind of find those people, it's amazing, and it kind of can make all those opportunities really, really valuable and really great learning experiences. And then also yourself be willing to kind of give back and mentor and help and support other people. We're all just kind of winging it out here, whatever it is. We're all winging it.
Yep. Yeah, no, look, I don't care how many 10,000 hours you've devoted. Life's a big lesson in winging it. 1000%.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, look, today was awesome. Thank you so much for all of, your generosity of time and emotion, and just you being you and setting such an example that you do for everybody that I know that looks up to you out there.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Appreciate it. And whoever's listening to this, hopefully they got something out of it. I think it's funny. I don't know. I just this is the only way that I know to be. And so for people to find it interesting or unique is, I don't know. I always kind of, that makes me laugh a little bit, but appreciate all the kind words. Really appreciate it. My mom will too. She'll love listening to this.
Well, look, big salute to all the moms out there listening, and like I said, all of the big respects are well deserved. So once again, man, thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Let's do it again soon.
Let's do it.
All right, man. Cheers.
Bye.